Okay, guys, so it's here, the video that we teased last week. We talked like a tiny bit about the one championship debut in the US, but we teased that we were gonna do a little bit of a longer conversation about it, just kind of comparing it with the UFC in terms of like, do we think that they can get to the same level as the UFC, at least in the US, because in Asia, one is pretty much the supreme MMA promotion. But I guess I'll start with some of the numbers that I found, and then like I'll kind of start the conversation. But like doing some research, it was interesting because I think like the UFC has a lot more public information about their business than One Championship does. That might be because like one is based in Asia too, so I don't know like exactly what the laws are over there with like how they file things, but everything in the US is like pretty much public and easy to find. But the UFC, it's been like reported that they made $1.14 billion in revenue in 2022, and their worth as a company pretty much like the market cap at 10 billion. And then One Championship, I only found like one source on this, so take it with like a grain of salt because it might be like swayed a bit. But 165 million is what they made last year. That's like million with an M, not billion. And One Championship is like a company they're valued at like around 1.4 billion, and then PFL was 500 million as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But I guess like in terms of the money, the UFC is still like dominant just around the world, and I think where it gets like really interesting is when you start to look at like the views, because one actually has like more views across social media than the UFC does by like a few billion. But we were talking before this, I kind of like attribute that to the fact that One Championship posts like all the time and they post reels constantly. But before like we kind of get into more of like the streaming services and like specifics into like who's fighting, just do you think that maybe there's even any chance that one could get close to the UFC in terms of like monetary value? Because now that they're on Prime, I think there's some potential for it. But I'll start it with that because like I don't want to overwhelm everybody with like all these numbers. I think the values is interesting enough, but what do you think? Do you think that one can reach the UFC's level in terms of like what they're valued at?
Yeah, I do. I do actually. And it's not so much even really to do with one. I think obviously now one coming over to the United States and running events is like huge. Obviously, is gonna bolster that. But it's really more in terms of like just the sport of MMA as a whole, and mixed martial arts and just really all the styles that one brings with their promotion, and just how that grows and evolves over the decade and stuff, and like what other fighters are going to be bringing in, whether they're former UFC champions or up and comers that are just trying to find a spot to maybe just start up or stick with, and maybe find home, one as like their home. But yeah, I do think so. And then you mentioned the Prime deal as well. Like that's another service that it's only gonna boom more and more. I would have to think like with time. So I what I was really kind of curious about was how the UFC not traveling. Obviously like now they are back seemingly in like a regular schedule with traveling and stuff, but that wasn't the case last year or the year before that or the year before that. So I was kind of curious as to like how their revenue got affected by.
Well, in 2021, they're still like way above One Championship. In 2021, they were 1.03 billion. So they basically had $100 million increase, which is, I
Wow.
mean, it's a big
Yeah.
increase, but it's not like they were desperate before that. You know what I mean? Like they were still
Yeah.
pulling in over $1 billion.
Yeah.
So I guess the answer to that would be just not as much. Maybe like to people like us who are watching every week, it was a problem, but it definitely didn't seem to affect their bottom line as much. And even during
And
COVID, it
just
seemed
like
like there wasn't much
naturally,
of a problem.
yeah, naturally too, like with Prime, you know, that's a streaming service you watch online wherever you are, really. Whereas, ESPN Plus, you're relying straight on ESPN Plus's like product and their service to run and not crash and deal with any problems and all that. And
Crashes a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So like you take those two, compare, and it's like, which one is the much better streaming service? Obviously, it's Amazon Prime. So that's gonna come as a convenience to a lot of regular MMA fans and a lot of new MMA fans. So that gets me pretty excited for one and their growth. How they're gonna continue to grow over the decade. So
I'm glad you brought that up though too, because that was one of the numbers I was gonna get into. So basically, there's like a category. It's called total digital views, and I found this. It's in the 2022 Nielsen Year in Review report, and it says that one championship had around 13.8 billion total views on Prime, and then the UFC had 6.6 billion total views. So like obviously that's a drastic difference, and I think that's probably because of what you were saying. Just in Prime, I definitely think is more worldwide.
And then, the social media too, with like you just mentioned, all the content and reels especially that one posts. Whereas like it's I don't know if we've ever talked about this on camera, but we definitely have like off just to like laugh at it, because it is just like it's like UFC's clips of finishes, you don't even see a finish. It's just the the winner celebrating all that, and then one gives you like damn near the entire fight. So it's like that. I feel like there needs to be a middle ground found with that. I think for both promotions.
The UFC seems to be starting to show some. I get why they don't do it with the pay-per-view fights, because they're like the pay-per-views are still available afterwards, so you might be able to get sales on the back end. But then at the same time, like some of these prelims that you see nowadays, they're starting to do it. But I think like that's a good start. And one, you have a solid point with that. Like maybe if they do that a little bit less, because one, I think their problem sometimes is that they have like oversaturation of posts. I think now they're doing a better job at like pinning things that matter at the top, like when the card is, because that used to be my big problem. I'd be like on Instagram searching for one championship, and like I'd be scrolling through 20 reels just to find when the card is that they're talking about. But nowadays, like at least on Instagram, I don't know about other like Twitter and stuff like that, but on Instagram they've done like a bit of a better job, but they still do post like a ton. And I think it's a very different style, clearly, that they have on social media. And the UFC still is supreme with social media around the world. Over like the major social media platforms, they have around 115 million followers, and one only has around 54 million. So the UFC, I guess, like if you're going by that, they definitely are having more numbers in terms of social media. They also have double the amount of views on YouTube, which is a big thing too. And this is like the last kind of part that I really wanted to get into with this, is just like, I think that to us, the biggest stars are in the UFC, because like a lot of the ones that they push are like the English speakers who are from America, and they're easy to push. But then like one championship, they have a lot of stars over in Asia when it comes to their Muay Thai fighters, or even just people like Demetrius Johnson and Sage Northcutt, who have come from the UFC and just are huge names at this point. But it looks like they're starting to kind of branch into like each other's territory. Like the UFC has been doing stuff in Asia for years, but now it seems like they're really starting to get into that market with like Road to the UFC on Fight Pass. You have like all these fighters now, like Zhang Weili, the Leech, Yan Xiaonan. We were talking about her recently, to the Korean Zombie, Korean Superboy. So like they're pushing these people who are from that part of the world, because they're trying to get that fan base more invested in the UFC. Because I think in Asia, one championship would probably be bigger. But one is also obviously trying to do the same thing, because they just had their their US debut in Denver. And I think they do want to have more fights in the US. And it seems like they're signing more fighters and grapplers. And you kind of touched on this before, just all the different styles that they have in their promotion. Like I think if you can get more people on board with that, that could really help them, because there's no other promotion that's really doing that when it comes to like grappling, Muay Thai, kickboxing, MMA. Like one championship is definitely ahead of the curve in that sense. But I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I'll say mine like real quick because I think like the numbers provide most of the explanation for me, but I don't know if one can ever catch up to the UFC in the US market just because of how much money the UFC has flowing, and now with this WWE deal, they're gonna like it's gonna be. I can only imagine how much they're gonna be worth another year from now, and they're starting to like mix the board up with that. They have like some WWE people, some UFC people, so it's like there's gonna be a lot of big brains at the top of that company, and I don't know, like because of that, I just kind of don't think that one championship can ever really get there in terms of the U.S. viewpoint of them. But worldwide, I think there's potential, but I don't know what the timetable would be on that. I think maybe next year, we'll have like another full year on Prime, full year of the UFC. As you mentioned too, like they're going back around the globe now for the fight nights too. I'd be curious to see what the numbers look like at the end of this coming year. Maybe we'll do like a sequel to this video in 2024. Who knows? But what do you think?
I agree with you in the sense that I don't think anytime soon at least like that's not happening with one catching up to the UFC in the States. But hold on, let me get this dog real quick. It slipped my mind for a second.
It's a complicated like thing to talk about.
Yeah, here's what I was gonna say actually.
Sure.
So with one, I get the worldwide thing and all that, but I feel like there's scheduling, Matt, because we've talked about it like over and over about how they could do better of promoting their events and stuff and getting people like to actually tune in, but I'm not actually familiar with their scheduling. So obviously UFC, like UFC has their their off season at the end of the year, and then obviously it's fight week. I mean fight night, pay-per-view, fight night, pay-per-view, off week, all that, And then one, dude, I've never really been. I've always really been like I've never really actually catched like a full one event. More so just the the big fights and stuff. So I'm not all that familiar with how their schedule works and all of that. In terms of like
pretty much have fights every week too, but most of them are catered towards like Asia because like some of them are Muay Thai main events. They do have like the big cards here and there, like the fight night that they had. It's funny. I think some of these are like out of date in the site that I should honestly be on Tapology instead. I think I'm gonna do that. But one championship does churn out events like pretty much as often as the UFC does. So there is that, but I don't think that nearly as many of them focus on like the U.S. market. And I think like you mentioned scheduling too. One part of that too is that like since a lot of them are in Asia, they're coming out at like 8 a.m. over here. So it's like one, like, well, not one, like the promotion, but like point number one, they, there's no point in really like putting that event at prime time in the US because they don't have like as many big names on the card. So it seems like they kind of save those US events for like when they do have like those bigger guys like Demetrius Johnson and Sage Northcutt and the ones that were kind of in that Denver event, or even like Stamp Fairtex. She's starting to get some love over in the U.S. finally. She's awesome. She's probably one of my favorite female fighters on the planet, any promotion. And she's just a Muay Thai fighter, but still, like MMA, Muay Thai, doesn't matter. She's exciting to watch. And like they do have exciting fighters too. That's the crazy part. You just have to be like a real MMA fan, I think, to start seeing it. But I don't know. I agree with you. Like, I don't know exactly what the timetable would be on it because the UFC has such like a stranglehold on the US market nowadays, and I think that while one could make some strides, I don't know how long, if they really can at all, just catch up to the UFC.
Yeah, and then even Bellator is happens on Fridays and stuff, and Bellator has big fights themselves, and then I guess
Bellator, believe it or not, sorry to cut you off, but like Bellator, believe it or not, doesn't even have crazy numbers compared to most of these other promotions. Like the ones,
I think Bellator just needs to totally just rebrand and already
figure it out.
And
they're on CBS now too, I think, which is You'd think that
Yeah,
that would
like
help a lot, get on
yeah,
network
I don't know,
television.
man. It just feels like the that one promotion, not the actual, like you said before,
Yeah,
not the literal
it's
one
tough when you're
promotion,
trying to
but
do
yeah,
numbers.
yeah. I just feel like they're just the one promotion that's kind of like stuck in, like purgatory. Whereas one actually, seems like they're going for it. They're trying to really rival UFC, and then obviously when PFL gets the ESPN, support and all that. So PFL obviously when they like really get going, obviously you're gonna have to watch out for them. Bellator, I don't know, I just feel like they never really been able to break that glass ceiling, and yeah, I don't know.
The PFL honestly might soon. I feel like there's a chance that they get Ngannou because Ngannou has, I think, what is it, tomorrow? He's making like a big announcement because we're recording this on Monday, so this video is probably going to come out on the same day as Ngannou's announcement. So if he goes to the PFL, this was recorded before that, or even if he goes to, because if he goes to one, which I don't think he's gonna after what just happened with them, but even if he went to one, that would pretty much like null and void some of the stuff that we said because I think he'd be a big person for the U.S. market. But Francis, from what it seems, it's either going to be boxing or it's going to be the PFL, and I would bet on the PFL right now, the day before, whatever he's going to say. But stay in tune with our social media. We'll obviously post about it whenever the news comes out because that'll be a huge thing. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Francis Ngannou, maybe besides Nate Diaz, and Nate, has the fight with Jake Paul booked, but I think that Francis is one of the biggest MMA free agents of all time. And wherever he goes, it's going to be a big thing because, the UFC heavyweight champion left in the middle of his title reign. That's a big deal. Like, Nate Diaz is a bigger star, but Francis Ngannou was the legit baddest man on the planet when he left the UFC. So wherever he goes, that promotion is going to be doing better numbers than they are now. But I think that puts the bow on that discussion. The numbers support the UFC as of now. One championship. They are good in certain ways, as we kind of laid out. But I don't know. I give my edge to the UFC currently, and it's tough considering they've almost like at one point they almost monopolized like the fight game, pretty much buying Pride and Strikeforce. Like they have all the crazy talent from the US. It's really nuts how the UFC has built it over the years. But I think that was an interesting discussion. Hopefully you guys learned a little something about the business behind MMA. We don't really do too many videos about this, but I thought it would be an interesting conversation because one, making their US debut lately. But check out our UFC Charlotte video from yesterday if you haven't already. Check out our interviews if you haven't done that, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that, because if not, what are you doing? But we'll see y'all.